I want to begin today with a deep dive into Bidenomics, as it's called, and look at a few different things in relation to that, including talk about what economic metrics are we referring to when we say, look, this is proof that Bidenomics is working. What are we talking about there? And we'll look at a few moments from a speech that Biden delivered in response to the August jobs report as we approached the Labor Day holiday, and a few other things as well. Always when we do segments like this, as I tout the pretty remarkable nature of the economic recovery we've seen since Biden has been president post the economic downturn caused by the pandemic, it's not to ignore the massive economic hardship that is very present still, and the massive issues that are still unaddressed, and all of the things that are so far from ideal with our economy. Absolutely the case. When looking, though, at the context of when Biden took over and the power a president has to influence their party and individually in his position as president, what has he done? How has that impacted the economic situation based on the power that he does have and the time he's been president? So with all that being said, I do think there is a fair case to be made that he has overseen a very remarkable economic recovery. And we'll start with this clip from his recent speech.
As we head into Labor Day, we ought to take a step back and take note of the fact that America is now one of the strongest job-creating periods in our history, in the history of our country. And it wasn't that long ago that America was losing jobs. In fact, my predecessor was one of only two presidents in history who entered his presidency and left with fewer jobs than when he entered. Look at where we are now. Just this morning, we learned that the economy created 190,000 jobs last month. All told, we've added 13.5 million jobs since I took office. Around 800,000 of them manufacturing jobs. We created more jobs in 2 years than any president ever created in a single four-year term.
And that is absolutely the case. Bizarrely, I see anytime Biden delivers speeches like this or in interviews touts these numbers, a lot of people within MAGA get super upset and rage at Biden for daring to tout the successes of his economic recovery, or at least the recovery he's overseen. And again, another disclaimer, the president doesn't have full control over the economy, not even close. But of course, they're going to take credit for a big recovery, especially when Biden did take steps and Democrats did take steps such as the American Rescue Plan to speed up that recovery. And thus, the United States saw a faster, more effective economic recovery than comparable G7 countries, is currently experiencing less inflation than other G7 countries, kind of the comparable economies. And so why that makes people who support Trump really upset, other than them prioritizing partisan politics over the well-being of people, I don't know. Very, very strange. But next clip before discussing further from the same speech.
We faced some pretty tough times in recent years. A pandemic that took more than 1 million of our friends and neighbors. 1 million fewer people sitting at our dining room or kitchen tables. People we raised and loved. People we grew up with. Gone. The worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. It wasn't that long ago that 20 million Americans were out of work. But the American people didn't give up. They never give up. They've never given up. And today we have the strongest economy in the world. The lowest inflation rate among the major economies. 13.5 million new jobs.
And I'll stop that one there. I played it for you because I think it's easy to forget the context in which Biden took over as president. We were in a crisis and an economic downturn caused by the pandemic. And it's pretty wild that within the time frame that Biden has been president, we've been able to go from that to where we are now. Again, so many problems still. But when judging the current economic state, I think contextualizing with that information and that reality that we were within is really important. And what's funny is I think it really bothers people, as you saw in the first clip, when Biden points out that Trump is one of two presidents in American history to have left office with fewer jobs than whenever he came into office because of the context of COVID. And it feels like Biden's ignoring that. That was because of COVID. Now, let's not forget that Trump mishandled that pandemic and caused things to be worse. But yes, of course, no matter who the president was, there was going to be an economic downturn because of the historic once-in-a-lifetime pandemic and the necessary response to it, and then the necessary recovery from it. But then they are unwilling to acknowledge that same exact event when judging Biden, and will say all of these remarkable historic achievements when it comes to the economic growth we've seen don't matter because inflation. But inflation was and is happening worldwide based on the different variables put into play during the pandemic, and we're experiencing less severe inflation, still higher than we want it to be, but much less severe than other G7 comparable economies. But when talking about Biden or judging Biden, gas prices and inflation, all of a sudden the context of COVID and all the different things that caused is out the window for the same people who want that to be considered when judging Trump's presidency and him being one of only two presidents to have left office with fewer jobs than when he took over. Let's consider the context for both. And with that in mind, again, Bidenomics clearly is working. And then one more clip here, and then we'll discuss Bidenomics further.
Next, thanks to the Inflation Reduction Act, which I might add not a single member of the other party voted for, we're making the most significant investment in clean energy and combating the existential threat of climate change that's ever been made anywhere in the world. According to outside experts, the Inflation Reduction Act is projected to create more than 1.5 million jobs over the next decade.
So that's kind of, as we look forward, the impact of some of these policies over the next decade, even benefiting us when it comes to jobs, as he mentioned there. But then on policies further back, like the American Rescue Plan, was attributed to have created years before, if ever, these jobs would have come back, millions of jobs during this recovery. So then the question is, did we strike the balance correctly? Are we going to kind of jolt back into good economic performance, but then a recession is going to hit us, as people keep predicting? Or have we kind of properly managed the landing from this crisis and then this recovery? And the labor secretary says we pretty much did it just right.
This is a good jobs report. This is what you'd want to see if you're looking for a soft landing. It's continued job growth. It is no longer that breakneck speed that we saw at the beginning of the recovery, but this is what the president has been talking about. When you reach a point where you've got slow, steady growth, we continue to have an unemployment rate that's less than 4% for the longest stretch since the 1960s. And as you mentioned, more people are coming back into the labor market.
So you heard her use the term there, soft landing. And it does seem like we're going to achieve that soft economic landing post the crisis, post the recovery, where we did see very quickly everything heat back up, but the cooling off is at a speed that is hoped for. Because in a weird way, a lot of people who hated Biden were almost rooting for, it seemed, a recession where sure, things kind of get back on track for a second and are headed back in the right direction, but it was overdone, and so things kind of fall back apart and we start backtracking, and that just doesn't seem to be likely, at least in the near future, despite all the predictions of doomsday being just around the corner. And that is really good to see. I have to note again, it's not that everything's where we want it to be, and there's so many things wrong. We have to keep fighting to address those things as progressives. But when it comes to the metrics we typically use, we really are getting back on track and are going in a really good direction, which is hopeful. Now, when looking at that and trying to understand, if people are saying in part this is because of Bidenomics, what is Bidenomics? What is that ideology? What is that approach as it's been coined with the name Biden? And CNN had an interesting piece trying to explain what the tenets of this ideology could be mapped out as, or explained as. And I'll start with this. This is kind of contextualizing it against trickle-down economics, which is, of course, Ronald Reagan's coined term. Trickle-down economics, which was at the heart of President Ronald Reagan's policies and continues to be the guiding light of Republican lawmakers, typically revolves around tax cuts for the wealthy and large corporations. Supporters say the benefits flow down to middle-class and working-class Americans. boosting economic growth more broadly, but many experts dispute the effectiveness of this practice at lifting all boats. Biden argues that supply-side trickle-down economics has cost jobs and hollowed out the middle class. He has long focused on that group of Americans, serving as chair of the middle class task force when he was vice president in the Obama administration. And then the article goes on to say the three pillars of Bidenomics as broken down by the Biden administration being making public investments in America, empowering and educating American workers, and promoting competition. The obvious attributes of making public investments is the infrastructure law, the American Rescue Plan, the Inflation Reduction Act, not being afraid to actually invest in these different beneficial programs that target especially working class and middle class Americans, and then empowering and educating American workers, different provisions, especially in the Inflation Reduction Act, to train people on the jobs of the future, and then promoting competition, attempting to lower costs and invest in small businesses and attempt to help them thrive. So it seems to be working. How much of that can you attribute directly to Biden, to Democrats more broadly? You can't exactly know. But clearly the predictions we've seen that the governance of the radical socialist or whatever will drive America into the ground is not accurate, as also highlighted by the historical record. Now, as things stand here over the last 6 presidents is net job creation. Clinton, Obama, and Biden, 47.3 million jobs. Bushes and Trump, the 2 Bushes and Donald Trump, 1.9 million jobs, net job creation. Now, there's a lot of context. COVID, you couldn't blame COVID for starting on Trump, all of that. Absolutely. Still a stunning chart, nevertheless. We will end it there. I had more to show you, but this segment is going on, so we'll stop there on Bidenomics. Let me know what you think. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to be a part of what makes this show possible, plus get access to the full video version of the show hours before all the clips are able to be uploaded to the YouTube channel, plus get the bonus show on the weekends, you can do so by going to lukebeasleyshow.com/membership. That's lukebeasleyshow.com/membership, and there's a link in the description.